Most people imagine betrayal as a moment of rage, of tears, of screaming accusations in a heated explosion. But Olivia? She just smiled. No heartbreak, no dramatic outburst, just a quiet, knowing smirk. Because the truth is, some betrayals don't shatter you. They set you free. What if I told you that the worst thing that ever happened to you might actually be the best thing? That the moment you think you've lost everything might be the exact moment you finally take control of your life. That's exactly what happened to Olivia. She spent years trapped in a marriage where love had turned into criticism, where every step she took was measured, controlled. But the night she found Ethan tangled in the sheets with another woman, something shifted. Not in him, but in her. And that changed everything. But don't be fooled. This isn't just another story of a woman scorned. No, this is a story about power, about deception, about discovering the truth when it's almost too late. And most importantly, it's about the kind of transformation that only happens when everything falls apart. Because in the ashes of betrayal, Olivia didn't break. She rebuilt. And the way this story unfolds, you won't see it coming. Olivia watched the door close behind Ethan, but instead of the crushing heartbreak she expected, she felt lighter. No tears welled up, no suffocating pain filled her chest. Instead, a strange, almost exhilarating sense of relief settled in. It wasn't the reaction people would expect from a woman whose husband of 12 years had just walked out. But here's the thing. Sometimes, the real tragedy isn't the breakup itself, but the years wasted pretending things were fine. And deep down, Olivia knew. This marriage had been over long before Ethan packed his bags. Everyone assumed she'd fall apart, maybe call her best friend in tears, or drown her sorrows in a bottle of wine. But that wasn't her style. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe without the weight of someone else's expectations pressing down on her. She had spent years tiptoeing around Ethan's moods, trying to be the perfect wife, constantly bending to fit into his rigid standards. Now, for once, the only person she had to answer to was herself. Funny how freedom often comes wrapped in what looks like loss. So instead of mourning, Olivia did something that would have made Ethan roll his eyes. She ordered sushi from the most expensive place in town, put on her favorite music, and danced barefoot in the living room. The same room that until yesterday had felt like a prison. It was a quiet rebellion, a declaration that she was done living under someone else's rules. And as she took a bite of her overpriced dinner, a thought began to form in her mind. If she was no longer living by Ethan's standards, what else could she do? What new doors had just opened now that she was finally free? Ethan had never been the easygoing type. He had a way of making everything feel like a negotiation, especially when it came to money. He'd scrutinize every purchase, frown at Olivia's choices, and remind her, constantly, of how financially irresponsible she was. It wasn't about saving money, it was about control. Their last trip together had been the perfect example. While Olivia had been excited to explore, Ethan spent most of the time complaining about overpriced food, unnecessary excursions, even the taxi fare. He acted like joy was a luxury they couldn't afford. The thing was, Olivia had experienced a different kind of travel before. She had gone on trips with her best friend, Danielle, and those trips had been full of adventure and laughter. No guilt, no complaints, just pure enjoyment. With Danielle, she could order dessert without hearing a speech about wasting money, and she could take spontaneous detours without feeling like she had to justify every dollar spent. It was a stark contrast to the life she had with Ethan, where even simple pleasures came with a price, his approval. Looking back, it was almost embarrassing how long she had accepted it. But that was the thing about toxic relationships. They don't break you all at once. They wear you down piece by piece so slowly that you don't even notice you're losing yourself. Now, sitting alone in her apartment, Olivia realized just how much of herself she had given up for the sake of keeping the peace. And for what? A man who had walked away without a second thought. Well, if he was done, so was she. But this time she wouldn't just let life happen to her. She was ready to take control. The moment Olivia stepped into their bedroom and saw Ethan tangled in the sheets with someone else, she felt nothing. No surge of rage, no gut-wrenching heartbreak. Just a quiet, detached realization that this was the inevitable conclusion to a story that had been falling apart for years. The other woman, Ava, looked just as shocked as Ethan, scrambling for the covers like a guilty child caught sneaking cookies before dinner. But Olivia, she just stood there, arms crossed, watching the ridiculous scene unfold. Ethan, ever the master of deflection, had the audacity to blame her. "If you had been more affectionate, if you had made me feel wanted, this wouldn't have happened," he muttered, as if his betrayal was somehow her fault. Olivia almost laughed. The irony was too much. She had spent years trying to be everything he wanted, sacrificing her own happiness to keep their marriage intact. And yet, here he was, proving that none of it had ever been enough. Not for him. But the real surprise, she didn't even care anymore. She was exhausted, yes, but heartbroken? Not even close. Without a single tear or dramatic outburst, Olivia walked over to her dresser, pulled out a drawer, and tossed Ethan's clothes onto the floor. "You can leave now," she said, her voice eerily calm. He hesitated as if waiting for some kind of emotional explosion, but it never came. She simply turned, walked to the door, and held it open. This was her apartment, legally, financially, hers. And just like that, with one final glance, Ethan realized something terrifying. He had lost control. With Ethan gone, Olivia sat in the middle of her apartment, letting the silence settle in. No more passive-aggressive comments, no more disapproving sighs, no more tiptoeing around his moods. For the first time in years, she had the space to think, really think, about what she wanted. And the answer came faster than she expected: a break. Not just from relationships, but from everything. The job, the routine, the version of herself that had spent years shrinking to fit into someone else's expectations. Maybe it was time to pack a bag and leave for a while. She thought of Danielle and how just a year ago she had been in a tough spot herself, trapped in a job that drained her and stuck in a relationship that left her second-guessing her worth. But Danielle had done something bold. She had taken time off, traveled, rediscovered herself, and come back stronger. Olivia had watched from the sidelines, cheering her on, but never daring to do the same. Maybe that was about to change. Maybe it was finally her turn to step away and figure out who she was, without Ethan's voice in her head. But then there was Ava. Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that something about her wasn't quite right. She wasn't just some random woman Ethan had cheated with. There was something calculated about her, something manipulative. Olivia wasn't the type to obsess over the past, but this wasn't over. Not yet. And as she stared out the window, the city lights twinkling like possibilities, she knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change in ways she never imagined. The news came late at night, a phone call that shattered the quiet peace Olivia had started to embrace. Ethan had been shot. It happened in a parking lot just a few blocks from his office. The police didn't have many details yet, only that an unknown assailant had fired at him before vanishing into the night. He was still alive, but in critical condition. Olivia's first reaction wasn't fear or sadness, but something far more unsettling. She felt nothing. When she arrived at the hospital, the tension in the air was thick. Detectives were already there, asking questions, assessing the situation. One of them, a sharp-eyed investigator named Matthew, took a particular interest in Olivia. "You seem calm," he noted, almost as if he expected her to be in hysterics. She shrugged. What was she supposed to do? Cry for a man who had betrayed her? Collapse in grief over someone she had already let go? But she knew how this looked. A woman, recently separated, with every reason to want her ex-husband out of the picture. Then came the most unexpected twist. The police found an earring at the scene, small, delicate, unmistakably feminine. But it wasn't Olivia's. And yet, as the detective turned it over in his hands, examining it under the sterile hospital lights, she felt the weight of suspicion settle on her. Someone had been there. Someone who wanted to make sure the blame landed squarely on her. The next morning, Olivia woke up to a firm knock on her door. She wasn't surprised. It was only a matter of time before the police came looking for her. Detective Matthew stood on her doorstep, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said, his voice carrying the weight of suspicion. Olivia stepped aside, letting him in, keeping her face neutral. She knew how this worked. Any sign of nervousness could be interpreted as guilt, and right now, she had no room for mistakes. "The earring found at the crime scene?" Matthew began, watching her closely. "It looked a lot like one you've worn before." Olivia almost laughed at the absurdity. So that was it. That was their so-called evidence? She shook her head. "I haven't worn earrings in weeks," she replied, keeping her tone even. "Maybe you should look into who else Ethan's been involved with." She could see the flicker of doubt cross Matthew's face. "That's right, Detective. Ethan wasn't exactly the devoted husband you think he was." Despite their suspicions, the detectives weren't convinced enough to arrest her, yet. Instead, they started digging deeper, shifting their attention to Ethan's business dealings, his financial records, his personal life. And that's when things got interesting. Ethan had more enemies than friends, business partners who had been burned, clients who felt cheated. Maybe, just maybe, someone else had a far better reason to want him dead. And as much as Olivia wanted to walk away from all of this, something told her she was far from done with this mess. Danielle had always been the one Olivia could count on, strong, fearless, always ready with a sarcastic remark to lighten the mood. But beneath that tough exterior, she had her own battles, ones Olivia knew only pieces of. Years ago, Danielle had fallen for Jay, a musician with the kind of charm that could light up a room. But charm wasn't enough to build a life on, and when she got pregnant, Jay's true colors showed. He wasn't just irresponsible, he was a coward, disappearing the moment things got serious. For a while, Danielle tried to manage on her own, raising their son while juggling work, dreams, and disappointments. But Jay's parents were wealthy, powerful, and they weren't about to let their grandson grow up without some control over his life. They forced Jay to take legal responsibility, providing financial support but little else. And even with money in the picture, nothing changed. Jay continued to live his life as if nothing had happened, chasing other women, making promises he never intended to keep, while Danielle carried the weight of reality alone. Olivia had seen how this had shaped Danielle, how it had hardened her. Love for her had become a transaction, a power struggle. And as Olivia sat across from her now, watching her friend sip her drink with that same unreadable expression, she couldn't shake a feeling. Danielle had always been there for her, but how much did Olivia really know about what her best friend was capable of? And more importantly, how far would Danielle go to take control of a situation? The phone call came out of nowhere, slicing through Olivia's already chaotic world like a blade. Her grandmother was gone. The woman who had raised her, who had been her safe haven when life felt unbearable, was suddenly just gone. Olivia had braced herself for Ethan's betrayal, for the police's suspicions, even for the unsettling truths she was beginning to uncover. But this hit different. The grief didn't come in waves. It came like a full-force storm, knocking the air from her lungs, leaving her standing in the middle of her apartment, unable to move. At the funeral, she barely heard the condolences, the murmured words about how her grandmother had lived a long life and was in a better place. None of it mattered. What did matter was the apartment, her grandmother's small but beautiful place now legally hers. It was a bittersweet inheritance, a reminder of the woman who had once filled it with warmth. Olivia didn't know what she'd do with it yet, but the idea of stepping inside, of feeling that familiar sense of comfort, was almost too much to bear. And then, to her absolute shock, Ethan showed up. He stood at a distance, dressed in black, looking almost remorseful. For a split second, Olivia felt something she hadn't in a long time: doubt. Why was he here? Was it guilt? A sudden realization of what he had lost? Or was there something else, something hidden behind that carefully composed expression? Because if Olivia had learned anything recently, it was that nothing and no one was ever as they seemed. The pieces finally started falling into place, and the picture they formed was more twisted than Olivia had imagined. It wasn't a random attack. It wasn't some disgruntled business associate. It was Danielle. The best friend who had been by her side through every heartbreak, every betrayal, had been the one to pull the strings behind Ethan's shooting. And she hadn't just orchestrated it. She had tried to frame Olivia for it. The earring at the crime scene, planted, the way the detectives had been led to suspect her, calculated. Danielle had always been protective of Olivia, but this wasn't about loyalty. It was about control. She had seen Ethan for what he was long before Olivia had, and in her mind, she was doing Olivia a favor, eliminating the problem once and for all. But when the police finally connected the dots, when they traced Danielle's movements and found the real evidence, there was no more room for doubt. When Olivia confronted her, Danielle didn't deny it. She simply smiled, a mixture of defiance and regret in her eyes. "You deserved better," she said, as if that justified everything. Olivia had spent years believing she knew the people closest to her, but now she realized how dangerously blind she had been. Ethan had betrayed her, but Danielle had tried to destroy her. And now, with the truth laid bare, there was only one thing left to do: walk away and never look back. Danielle's plan unraveled faster than she could control. Once the police had enough evidence, there was no escaping the consequences. Olivia didn't stick around for the dramatic arrest or the courtroom battles that followed. She had spent enough time living in other people's messes. Instead, she packed a bag, took a deep breath, and stepped into the life she should have been living all along. No more toxic relationships. No more being someone else's collateral damage. For the first time in years, she didn't feel trapped. The apartment her grandmother had left her, it became her sanctuary. A place that wasn't filled with memories of Ethan's judgment or Danielle's manipulation. A space that was entirely her own. She filled it with light, with color, with books she never had time to read before. She traveled, not to escape, but to discover. She learned how to be alone without feeling lonely, and that more than anything was the real freedom. As she sat on her balcony one evening, watching the city glow beneath her, she realized something profound. She had survived. No more than that. She had rebuilt. The Olivia who had once doubted herself, who had stayed in a loveless marriage out of habit, who had ignored the warning signs of betrayal, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had walked through fire and come out stronger, and as the breeze whispered against her skin, she finally allowed herself to smile, not because of what she had lost, but because of everything she had gained. So now I'll ask you, what would you have done in Olivia's place? Would you have fallen apart, let the betrayal define you, let the past keep you trapped? Or would you have done what she did, stood up, walked away, and taken back your power? Because the truth is, most people stay. They stay in toxic relationships, in situations that suffocate them, all because they fear the unknown more than they fear their own suffering. But here's the thing, the life you deserve is always waiting on the other side of fear. Olivia didn't just survive her betrayal, she thrived because of it. She didn't waste time plotting revenge, she didn't beg for an apology. She reclaimed her story. And if she can do it, why can't you? Maybe this is your moment. Maybe it's time to stop holding on to what's breaking you and start reaching for what will heal you. If this story made you think, if it opened your eyes to something in your own life, then don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications, and join this journey of powerful stories that change lives. Because sometimes, all it takes is the right story at the right time to change everything.